As a boy, no child wanted Chidi in their games. They laughed at his small body and bent frame. He stood alone while others played under the sun. Even his laughter was mocked until he learned silence. When he became a man, he thought things would be different, but the pain only deepened. Every woman refused his hand in marriage. His life was nothing but rejection from the start. Welcome back. As you enjoy the story, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe and also share with your friends. Now back to the story. The night was noisy in the village square, yet Chidi sat quietly on a low wooden stool at the edge, as though the celebration was not for him. The moon shone brightly, and the sound of drums echoed through the air. Boys his age were wrestling in the sand while girls in colorful ankara skirts clapped and cheered them on. Chidi's heart ached, but he did not show it. He had learned long ago that if he showed pain, they would laugh harder. Chidi was born different. His body was small, his legs short, and his arms were not like the other boys. From the time he was a child, no one wanted to play with him. They would push him aside in games, calling him names like half-man or broken one. Even when he tried to laugh it off, the sting stayed in his chest. By the time he grew into a young man, it was no better. Whenever men gathered to talk about marriage, none of the girls mentioned his name. He was invisible, unless someone wanted to make a joke. But Chidi was not empty. He carried something inside that no one knew. His late grandfather had taught him the art of carving, how to take an ordinary piece of wood and turn it into a mask, a spoon, or even a stool strong enough to last for generations. Whenever he carved, he forgot his size and his pain. He felt whole. On that night of the celebration, Chidi watched as the village praised the strong men. The wrestling champion was lifted on shoulders, women ululated, and even the chief's daughter, Aurora, stood among the maidens, clapping with admiration. Chidi lowered his eyes. He knew she would never look his way. Suddenly, the drumming stopped, and the mood shifted. The chief, an elderly man with a broad chest wrapped in a rich Kent cloth, stood up slowly. His voice carried authority. "My people," he began, "today we feast and rejoice. But tomorrow comes the great test. The young men will compete for strength and bravery, and whoever proves himself worthy shall be considered for my daughter's hand." The crowd roared. Men pounded their chests, already boasting of how they would win. Some glanced at Aurora with pride, dreaming of walking beside her as husband. Chidi's stomach tightened. He knew this competition was not for someone like him. He would only be mocked if he stepped forward. But just as the chief was about to dismiss the gathering, an accident happened. From where it hung high in the palace courtyard, the sacred calabash suddenly slipped and fell to the ground. A sharp gasp ran through the crowd. The calabash cracked, and a strange silence spread like fire across the square. That calabash was no ordinary one. It held the village's protection charm, something passed down for generations. Elders whispered that if it broke completely, disaster would fall upon the land. The chief bent over the calabash, his face grave. He lifted it slowly, and indeed, there was a long crack down its side. He looked around at his people. "Who will repair this?" he asked, his deep voice echoing. "Who among you has the skill to restore what guards our village?" For the first time that night, the strong men fell silent. They could fight and boast, but none of them had ever carved or repaired anything of such sacred importance. Chidi's heart raced. He knew the calabash was like no other. It required patience, steady hands, and understanding of the old ways. His grandfather had once shown him how such things were bound with wood and resin. Chidi looked down at his hands. He could do it. He believed he could. But fear held him. If he spoke and failed, they would laugh louder than ever before. If he remained silent, the village might face danger. The chief's eyes swept the crowd. "Is there no one among you?" he asked again. "Will we watch our protection fade while we boast of muscles and height?" Chidi's lips trembled. He felt something rise inside him, courage mixed with desperation. He stood slowly, and heads turned in surprise. The same boys who once mocked him laughed out loud. "See him," one shouted. "The dwarf wants to fix the god's calabash." Chidi ignored them. His eyes stayed on the chief. "I can do it," he said, his voice clear though soft. "Give it to me, and I will repair it." The crowd erupted in laughter and whispers. Some shook their heads. Others looked at the chief, waiting for his reply. The chief studied Chidi for a long moment. The night breeze rustled his Kent cloth, and his face was unreadable. Then, without a word, he handed the cracked calabash to one of the guards. The guard carried it and placed it carefully before Chidi. "Do it, then," the chief said firmly. "Let the gods decide." Chidi bent over the sacred object, his hands steady though his heart pounded. The crowd leaned closer, half expecting him to fail instantly. For the first time in his life, every eye in the village was on him, not to mock, but to watch what he would do. And deep inside, Chidi whispered to himself, "This is my chance. I will not waste it." The crowd did not hide their doubts. Some folded their arms, some whispered into each other's ears, while others chuckled openly. To them, Chidi was nothing but a dwarf boy trying to do a man's work. Still, Chidi sat on the ground, the cracked calabash resting gently before him. The moonlight fell on its glossy surface, highlighting the deep line that ran across it like a scar. He remembered his grandfather's words, "Patience, my son. The wood speaks to the one who listens." Chidi closed his eyes for a moment. He inhaled deeply, shutting out the laughter and whispers. When he opened them again, he focused on the calabash. He asked for resin, palm fiber, and a sharp knife. Some of the men laughed harder. "What does he think this is? A child's toy?" one of them mocked. But the chief raised his hand and ordered silence. The items were brought. Chidi's small hands began to work. First, he cleaned the cracked edges carefully. Then he shaved thin strips of palm fiber, mixing them with resin to form a strong binding paste. His movements were slow, deliberate, almost like a prayer. The people watched in silence now, though their eyes still carried doubt. Time passed. The drums that had once filled the night were silent. Only the sound of Chidi's scraping and tapping filled the square. Sweat ran down his face, but he kept going. He pressed the paste gently into the crack, sealing it with patience. His hands did not tremble, and for a moment, the villagers saw something they had never seen before. A boy who was mocked all his life working with the calmness of an elder. But just as he was almost done, one of the young men, Obinna, stepped forward. Obinna was tall, broad-shouldered, and proud. He had always been the loudest in mocking Chidi. "Chief," Obinna said loudly, "this is a waste of time. How can we trust our sacred protection to one who cannot even wrestle like a man? Give it to me. I will fix it." The people stirred, some nodding in agreement. But the chief's eyes remained on Chidi. "He asked for the chance," the chief said firmly. "Let him finish." Obinna's jaw tightened. He looked at Chidi with scorn. "If you fail, I will make sure you are chased from this village," he hissed under his breath, so only Chidi could hear. Chidi felt a chill, but he did not stop. He remembered too clearly the countless times Obinna and others had shoved him aside, calling him useless. He knew this was not just about the calabash. It was about proving that he, too, was part of this village. Finally, after long minutes, Chidi finished. He held the calabash gently, lifting it for the chief to see. The crack was no longer visible. The surface looked smooth and whole. The villagers leaned forward, whispering in surprise. But repairing the calabash was not enough. The real test was whether the gods would accept it. The chief took the calabash carefully and placed it on the shrine at the center of the square. He poured libation, speaking words of prayer. The air grew heavy, and the crowd held its breath. Then something happened. The oil poured into the calabash did not leak. It sat inside, steady and unmoving, as though it had never been cracked at all. A murmur of awe rose from the people. Some gasped, others clapped their hands in disbelief. The elders nodded slowly. "The gods have accepted it," one said. The chief turned to Chidi. For the first time, his stern face softened. "You have done what none of these men could," he declared. The square erupted. But the noise was mixed. Some cheered, some grumbled, and a few still mocked in low voices. Obinna clenched his fists in anger. That night, As people returned to their homes, Chidi felt something new in his chest. It was not pride exactly, it was a quiet strength, the kind that comes when you finally see your own worth. But he also knew this was only the beginning. For though he had repaired the calabash, he could feel the eyes of envy and resentment on his back. The road ahead would not be smooth. Still, for the first time in his life, Chidi walked home not as the boy people laughed at, but as the one who had saved the village from fear. The morning after the calabash was restored, the village was alive with whispers. Women fetching water from the stream spoke about it, their voices carrying both wonder and disbelief. Men at the palm wine tap whispered about the dwarf who had succeeded where they had failed. Some gave Chidi praise. Others insisted it was luck. But one thing was clear, for the first time in his life, Chidi's name was on everyone's lips. Chidi tried to live quietly, as he always had. He went about his day carving stools and spoons, his workshop filled with the smell of wood shavings. But he could not shake the feeling that eyes were always on him now. Children who once mocked him followed him with wide eyes, whispering, "That's the one who fixed the chief's calabash." Some of them even smiled shyly at him. It was strange, he had never been the subject of admiration before. But not everyone was pleased. In a shaded corner of the village square, Obinna sat with two other young men, his face twisted with anger. "So this is how it ends." Obinna spat. "A dwarf makes us all look like fools, and the chief praises him." One of his friends shrugged. "But the calabash was fixed, Obinna. You saw it with your own eyes." "Fixed by trickery." Obinna snapped. "I will not let him rise above me. I will make him fall, and when he does, the whole village will see him for what he truly is, nothing." Their laughter was low and bitter. That same week, the chief announced that a second test would come. It was custom for the young men to prove themselves not only with strength, but also with service to the people. In 3 days, the chief said, the forest festival begins. Each young man will bring forth an offering for the gods. The one who brings the finest gift will win honor before the people. The square buzzed with excitement. The strong men boasted of the animals they would hunt. Some planned to bring rare beads, others fine cloth. Chidi listened quietly. He owned no wealth, nor could he run deep into the forest to catch wild animals. He thought of his small hut and his tools. That was all he had. Still, something in him whispered, "Do not fear. Use what you know." At night, he worked by the glow of a small lantern. He selected a piece of wood, smooth, strong, and unmarked. With his knife, he began to carve. Every stroke was slow and careful. As he worked, he thought of the crack in the calabash, of the mocking voices, of the loneliness he had carried since childhood. His pain flowed into the wood. He did not stop until the shape began to form, a small figure of a mother holding a child close to her chest. It was simple, yet alive with feeling. 3 days later, the village gathered once again. One by one, the young men stepped forward with their offerings. A leopard skin, a bag of cowries, beads that glistened in the sun. The people clapped and cheered for each one. Finally, Chidi was called. He stepped forward slowly, holding the small carved figure in his hands. A murmur spread through the crowd. Some laughed outright. "Is this a joke?" someone said. "Where is the cow or the cloth?" another sneered. Obinna smirked, arms folded, certain Chidi would be humiliated. But the chief leaned forward as Chidi placed the carving before him. He picked it up gently, turning it in his hands. The crowd hushed as the chief studied it. His eyes softened. "This," the chief said slowly, "is not just wood. This is a story carved by hand. It speaks of love, of care, of what binds us as a people. A man who can make wood speak such truth is a man with a gift." The square fell silent. Then, slowly, clapping began. It spread until the air was filled with applause. Some still doubted, some still mocked in whispers, but others looked at Chidi differently now, with respect instead of scorn. Obinna's face darkened. His jaw clenched so tightly it looked like he might break his teeth. He muttered to his companions, "This is not over." That night, as the festival fires burned, Chidi sat alone outside his hut, staring at the stars. For the first time, he allowed himself to wonder. Could it be that my life will change? Could it be that the same people who once laughed at me may one day accept me? But even as he dared to hope, he did not know what Obinna was planning in the shadows. The days after the festival felt different for Chidi. For the first time in his life, he could walk through the market without hearing cruel laughter. Some of the women even greeted him kindly, and a few mothers nudged their children to wave at him. His carving of the mother and child had touched people in ways they didn't expect. But not everyone shared in that change. In the dark corners of the village, Obinna's anger grew heavier. He could not accept that Chidi, the boy he had mocked since childhood, was now being praised. Every compliment Chidi received felt like an insult to him. One evening, as palm wine was being shared in the square, Obinna pulled his closest friends aside. His voice was low but sharp. Do you not see how dangerous this is? Today they clap for him. Tomorrow they will call him leader. What place will that leave for us? One of them frowned. But, Obinna, the chief himself has praised him. If we go against Chidi now, we go against the chief. Obinna leaned in, his eyes burning. Then we must not go against him openly. We must make him fall by his own hands. That night, while most of the village slept, Obinna crept to Chidi's small workshop. Inside, he scattered wood shavings across the floor and tipped over Chidi's tools. Then, with a wicked grin, he took the mother and child carving and hid it under his cloth. Let us see how the people look at you when they find you have stolen from the shrine, he whispered. The next morning, a shout broke out in the square. The chief's guard announced that the carving Chidi had presented at the festival was missing from the shrine. Panic spread. People muttered about curses and disrespect to the gods. By midday, Obinna himself strode into the square, holding the carving in his hand. His voice rang out, "Look what I found, hidden in Chidi's hut." The same carving he gave to the chief, he tried to steal it back. The crowd gasped. All eyes turned to Chidi, who stood stunned. His heart pounded in his chest. "That is a lie," he cried. "I never touched it. I carved it as a gift, not for myself." But Obinna's voice was louder, sharper. "Why should we believe him? He is bitter, always mocked, always alone. Perhaps he seeks revenge by shaming us before the gods." The crowd was divided. Some shook their heads, saying Chidi would never do such a thing. Others murmured, suspicious. After all, who had ever heard of a dwarf bringing honor to a village? It was easier to believe he had failed. The chief raised his hand, and silence fell. He looked at Chidi for a long time. "This is a serious matter," he said gravely. "If you have truly stolen from the shrine, you have insulted the gods and endangered us all." Chidi's eyes burned with tears, but he stood tall. "I swear before the gods and before this village, I did not steal it. I gave it from my heart. Someone is lying." The chief's gaze swept the crowd. "Then let the gods judge. Tomorrow, when the sun reaches its highest, Chidi will face a test. If he is innocent, he will be saved. If he is guilty, he will fall." The crowd murmured in shock. Some pitied Chidi, others whispered curses. Obinna smiled secretly, certain that Chidi would not survive the trial. That night, Chidi sat alone in his hut, the weight of despair pressing down on him. All his life he had been mocked, rejected, unwanted. Just when it seemed he was beginning to be seen for who he was, everything was being ripped away. He knelt by his wooden stool, his hands trembling. "Gods of my fathers," he whispered, "I have never asked for much. Only to be accepted, only to be useful. If tomorrow is my end, let me at least leave this world with my truth known. I did not steal." The night was long and heavy. Chidi did not sleep. He did not know that in the darkness, Adaora, the chief's daughter, had overheard Obinna's plotting earlier that week. She held a secret that could save Chidi, but revealing it meant standing against one of the most respected young men in the village. As dawn crept over the horizon, the village prepared for the trial. And Chidi, small and alone, prepared to face not only the judgment of the chief, but of every mocking voice that had ever told him he was nothing. By midday, the entire village gathered in the square. The sun hung high, scorching the earth, but no one left. Word had spread quickly. Chidi, the dwarf who had mended the chief's sacred calabash and carved a figure that moved hearts, was to face a trial for stealing from the shrine. The chief sat on his carved stool, his Kent cloth draped neatly over his shoulders. Elders lined up beside him, their faces grave. The crowd murmured restlessly. Children clung to their mothers' wrappers, eyes wide. Chidi stood in the middle of the square, his small frame dwarfed by the guards around him. He felt the weight of every gaze pressing down, but his voice was steady. I did not steal from the shrine. I carved that figure as a gift to the gods and to this village. I will not confess to a lie. Obina stepped forward confidently, holding the carving in his hands. And yet it was found in your hut, he said, raising it high for everyone to see. Why deny what is clear? Gasps rippled through the crowd. To them, the evidence seemed damning. The chief raised his hand. Enough. The gods will decide. The trial was simple. Chidi was to place his hand on the repaired calabash while an elder poured palm oil inside. If the oil leaked, it would mean the gods rejected him, proving guilt. If it stayed, it would mean innocence. The square fell silent. A guard placed the sacred calabash before Chidi. Its surface shone, whole and unbroken, just as he had repaired it. Chidi's heart pounded. He remembered his grandfather's words again, patience, my son. The wood speaks to the one who listens. He placed his trembling hand on the calabash. An elder lifted the gourd of palm oil and began to pour. Every drop glittered under the sun as it slid into the calabash. The crowd held its breath. The oil settled inside. Not a single drop escaped. The calabash remained steady. A collective gasp spread through the people. Whispers turned into loud voices. He is innocent. The gods have spoken. But before relief could sweep through the square, a clear voice rang out from the edge of the gathering. Wait! All heads turned. It was Aurora, the chief's daughter. She stepped forward, her ankara wrapper tied neatly, her face calm but firm. I cannot stay silent, she said. I heard Obina plotting days ago. He said he would destroy Chidi, and I saw him sneak near Chidi's hut the night before the carving went missing. The square erupted into noise. Obina's face drained of color, then flushed with rage. Lies, he shouted, but his voice shook. She lies because she pities him. But Adeora's eyes did not waver. I know what I saw, and now the gods themselves have cleared Chidi. Must we still pretend? The elders looked at one another. The chief's face darkened as he turned to Obina. You would disgrace this village with deceit? You planted what was not his, hoping to ruin him. Obina stammered, but the people's voices rose in anger. For years, they had admired Obina's strength, but now they saw his envy laid bare. The chief ordered him taken away, declaring that such jealousy had no place in the heart of a leader. The crowd turned back to Chidi. For the first time in his life, the same voices that once mocked him now chanted his name. Mothers lifted their children to see him. Men clapped him on the back. Tears filled Chidi's eyes. The rejection he had carried all his life began to break away like old chains. The chief stood and raised his staff. Today, the gods have spoken. Strength is not in height or muscle alone. It is in patience, in honesty, in the work of the hands, and in the courage of the heart. Chidi has shown us what true strength is. The square roared with approval. Then, to everyone's shock, Aurora stepped closer to Chidi. She looked at him not with pity, but with respect. I choose not the strongest wrestler, she said softly, but the one whose heart speaks truth. The crowd fell silent, then gasped. The chief looked at his daughter for a long time, then nodded slowly. So be it. That day, the dwarf no one wanted to play with, the man no woman wished to marry, was lifted on the shoulders of the same people who once mocked him. They carried him around the square, their voices rising in song. For the first time, Chidi belonged. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, subscribe and turn on your notification for more. See you soon.